Imagine a plant that farmers across the United States destroy by the ton every year. A plant labeled a weed, pulled out, thrown away, never given a second look. Now, imagine this. That same plant contains more nutrients than many of the healthy foods lining supermarket shelves. And more than that, it kept people alive for generations. This plant is called lamb's quarters. If you live in the US, there's a good chance it grows. In your backyard, along sidewalks, on abandoned lots, even through cracks in asphalt, you've probably walked past it hundreds of times. So here's the real question. How did a plant that could literally feed a family end up being treated as unwanted? Lamb's quarters existed long before supermarkets, vitamin supplements, and buzzwords like organic or superfood. Indigenous tribes across North America relied on it. Pioneers gathered it. It thrived wherever the soil was exhausted and food was scarce. This wasn't just a weed. It was survival food. But as industrial agriculture took over, a plant that couldn't be patented, didn't need to be bought, and grew on its own became inconvenient. So it was easier to label it a weed. In this series, we're not looking at lamb's quarters as wild greenery, but as a forgotten food resource, one that modern systems quietly trained us to ignore. What makes lamb's quarters truly dangerous to forget isn't how common it is, it's how nutrient-dense it is. Gram for gram, lamb's quarters rivals, and in some cases outperforms spinach. Its leaves are loaded with vitamin A for vision and immune function, vitamin C for tissue repair and resilience, calcium for bones, magnesium and potassium for muscles and nerves, iron for oxygen transport. And unlike many modern vegetables, it also contains a meaningful amount of protein. This matters more than it sounds. For people living off the land, pioneers, displaced families, indigenous tribes, food wasn't about trends. It was about nutrients per bite. Lamb's quarters delivered exactly that. It grows fast. It tolerates poor soil. It doesn't need care, fertilizer, or irrigation. And it produces tender edible leaves when most crops struggle. That's why it often appears after fires, floods, or soil disruption, not as a problem, but as a response. Nature's way of restoring nutrition quickly. Yet there's an irony here. Modern agriculture prioritizes crops that grow uniformly, ship well, look identical, can be owned, branded, and sold. Lamb's quarters does none of that. It grows when and where it wants. It doesn't fit neatly into rows, and you can't control who eats it. So instead of being studied, cultivated, or taught, it slowly disappeared from kitchens and reappeared only in weed control manuals. But nutritionally, nothing about it disappeared. The plant didn't change. Only our relationship to food did. And that shift explains why something so valuable ended up so invisible. For most of history, lamb's quarters didn't need to be explained. People recognized it because hunger trained the eye. The leaves were eaten like spinach, raw when young, cooked when mature. Seeds were dried, ground, and used much like grain. Nothing fancy, nothing wasted. What mattered was that it worked. Knowing how to identify lamb's quarters was once practical knowledge, passed down the same way as fire making or shelter. Today, that knowledge is rare, not because the plant disappeared, but because the need to notice it did. Modern food systems removed urgency, stores replaced seasons, packaging replaced familiarity. So wild edible plants became invisible, or worse, suspicious. Yet lamb's quarters still shows up exactly where it always did. Disturbed soil, empty lots, gardens, roadsides, quietly waiting. And that raises an uncomfortable thought. If supply chains broke tomorrow, If stores emptied, if normal paused, this plant would still grow. It doesn't require permission. It doesn't wait for trucks or fertilizer. It doesn't care about prices. It just grows. Lamb's Quarters isn't about going backward or rejecting modern life. It's about remembering that resilience once came from knowledge, not convenience. And the more centralized food becomes, the more fragile it is. Plants like this were never meant to disappear. They were meant to be forgotten until they're needed again. And history suggests that moment always comes.